With how bad the last Bethesda projects have been, in my opinion, these last few years, with Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 being trashed in my opinion, I am really surprised that I'm having so much fun with Starfield, because I just thought it would be another trash game. Especially with how bad Xbox Game Studios have been with their releases, I didn't really expect a whole lot from Starfield from those two combinations, but I'm really glad, at least in my viewpoint, that they proved me wrong. The number one thing that I've really been enjoying about Starfield, and I know it's not perfect and not what everybody wanted, but the planet exploration is just, it's so fun to me. And it reminds me a lot of what they did back in Daggerfall, back in 1996, with the scale and scope of its procedural generation. And what I think makes procedural generation so nice in these Bethesda games is that it changes up what you might find on a certain planet. So even though you will always have some points of interest that are permanent on the planet's surface map, the other ones are not. So you can get a mine, a civilian outpost, or even some sort of abandoned building depending on what the game decides. In Skyrim though, everything is set, so a place like Bleak Falls Barrow will always be there because that's where it was meant to be. And this is just a reminder, I like handcrafted stuff like I like procedural generation, and I think that there is a perfect mix that you can get from procedural generation and the handcrafted stuff that Bethesda Game Studios can use to make a perfect formula. And even though Starfield isn't necessarily perfect with that formula, I do think it is a step in the right direction. So it's kind of nice to see them use some of the stuff they did with Daggerfall, but put it in the modern Bethesda games instead of just making a Skyrim in space or a Oblivion in space or whatever. They kind of took a risk, and for some people, I could see why it wouldn't pay off in their eyes, but I do like it. Another thing that I want to talk about that is obviously not perfect and not necessarily what people wanted, but I've really been enjoying, is the space part of the game. I do have tons of fun seeing the planned events like Anomaly, Spacer Contact, Star Stations, and I also like the unplanned events like getting randomly ambushed in space by pirates, or Galbank if you have a bounty, random ship encounters like meeting a ship trying to sell you lemonade, or a ship that is being used to escort school kids on their field trip. The only real negative I have about space in Starfield is the lack of being able to stay in space and travel from place to place, since you're mostly fast traveling instead of actually flying there. But I don't find it to be too big of a deal. I just wished that the loading screens was our ship flying in space instead of a blank loading screen, so it could at least feel a bit more immersive instead of just the traditional Bethesda loading screen. Now, on to combat. I feel it's okay in the game. I do feel it is a bit inferior to Fallout 4 because of the lack of a VATS type system, which I really enjoy in the Fallout games. But the inclusion of jetpacks and different variety of jetpacks does add verticality to combat, since it's easier to get high ground on your enemies who do not have jetpacks. And it makes movement in the game genuinely quicker too, so that is a positive, even though again, the combat is slightly worse from Fallout 4. On a side note, I know that technically jetpacks were in Fallout 4, but it was very bare bones compared to what they did in Starfield. Now the next thing I'd like to talk about is on the Xbox Series S, which is where I'm playing Starfield. It is pretty good bug-wise. In my little over a day worth of playing, I've had maybe 3 or 4 hard crashes, and no serious game-breaking glitches so far. Most bugs I've run into are just little ones, which is surprising for a Bethesda game, and I know this might sound like something that's not really worth noting, but if you are a fan of Bethesda games, or just know about their reputation in general, then you know that Starfield being as polished as the game has been is a big surprise, because I thought it would be a mess like the previous games before it. Now, on this next point, I am going to talk about some things that bother me with Starfield, or I wish were changed, but just because there are things that I want done differently with Starfield doesn't mean that it's not a fun game. And if a game is fun, then in my opinion it's a good game. But just because it's a good game does not mean it's a perfect game. The first complaint I have is that it's crazy to me that it runs only 30 FPS on a console that can literally do 120 FPS. As someone who prefers performance over visual quality, I wish I was given an option of slightly uglier graphics for higher frames. Now, a bigger complaint I have is that the game menus are bad, especially compared with other Bethesda Game Studio projects, because when you go into the menu to see your inventory, your level, the map, or anything like that, it just feels really disorganized to me, and I think a system like they had with the Skyrim or Fallout was just way better. Now, one of the biggest nitpicks I have with the game is the fact that there is no city map in the game for the bigger places like New Atlantis, for example. So if you want to find something like the Trade Authority, or maybe a clothing shop, or the medicine area, good luck finding it because there's no map that's going to tell you like there was in, let's say, Oblivion, Morrowind, Skyrim, Fallout 3, Fallout 4. So you're just kind of put into a really bad position, especially for the fact that the cities in Starfield are bigger than the ones than, let's say, Skyrim, for instance. Now, another big nitpick I have with Starfield is that I hate that they made it to where sprinting will deplete your oxygen, and if your oxygen bar runs out and your CO2 bar is all the way filled, you will start to lose health. I also hate that if you are encumbered, you will lose oxygen by just jogging. I would have preferred it where if you were over encumbered, you just couldn't sprint instead. I think that would overall just be better. And the last thing I want to talk about when it comes to this isn't even a nitpick, this is a straight up complaint, is I hate how long the intro for Starfield is. It is so boring, and it's never good to introduce new players or just returning players of your projects to boring introductions. Skyrim's beginning was boring, Oblivion's beginning was boring, Fallout 3's beginning was boring, Fallout 4's beginning is boring. Why do they keep continuing to make boring introductions into their games? I don't understand. Especially when a game like Morrowind did not have a boring introduction. It just asked you for your race, your class information, and your birth sign, and then it puts you into the world and lets you do whatever you want. They literally did it perfect in Morrowind. I don't know why they haven't copied that since. Or at least given the players an option like you'll see in alternate start mods in Skyrim to choose what type of beginning they want. Now, if you made it this long into the video, give me your thoughts and opinions on Starfield. Do you think it's a fun game like I do? Do you hate the game? These videos are meant to serve as a base to have an open discussion about video games or whatever the topic of the video is. So please give me your opinions in the comments, and
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.